So let's kind of talk about this game. Um, so Starfield, right? This is kind of Bethesda's first new IP in quite a long time. Traditionally, they've done games like just sequels to Elder Scrolls, or ever since they got a hold of the Fallout franchise, sequels to Fallout, right? And of late, they haven't really come out with anything new. Elder Scrolls Online gets pretty decent amount of support, and Fallout 76 eventually got a little bit better. So when they announced Starfield, a lot of people were really hyped for this, and they hyped it up a lot themselves. Of course, Todd Howard is a little bit notorious for being a little bit of a hype man for his own franchises. We joke around a lot about him kind of just saying that, it just works, right? The games that they make just work. And to their credit, their games definitely do things that very few other games do. They are usually fairly large open worlds. They usually have pretty deep lore, a lot of spoken dialogue. Their stories, for the most part, are generally pretty good, especially their side stories for their side quests and such. But the thing is they've just been doing sequels for so long. So Starfield, when it got announced and it finally released, came to a lot of hype. Now let's talk about gameplay. It feels very, very much like a more polished Fallout 4. The weapon system and the combat definitely seems to have taken a lot of cues from that, which it kind of has to, just by the nature of you can't really use Skyrim's system as a base, just because that's mostly fantasy weaponry, a lot of melee weapons, a lot of bows and arrows, crossbows, magic. So taking the kind of the bones of the Fallout combat systems and tailoring them for a little bit more modern, for a little bit more of a modern aesthetic, it works. It definitely works. It feels good. Weapons have pretty decent feedback. There seems to be a decently wide variety. I found like 3 different types of pistols. There does, multiple types of rifles, multiple types of ammo. So there's ballistics and energy that I found so far. And it seems like there's kind of multiple amounts of melee weapons. So weapon variety seems good. Now for the stats between them, they kind of still are in this weird arbitrary thing where the stats of the gun you're just going to go with whatever number is higher, versus in another game like, well, I don't know, it's an RPG, so it kind of works. You're going to end up going with whatever number is higher. There does appear to be a mod system in the game where you can tailor a gun a little bit closer to what you like, but in the end it kind of comes, I don't know how much that'll change the gunplay. It does seem like it's going to be more or less, you put the stock on, you put this scope on, you put this barrel on, it's going to change some stats. Maybe it changes a little bit how the gunplay feels. I know that there seemed to be a difference between the 2 Grendels that I got, which is one was fully automatic and the other one was semi, right? And it said one had a muzzle brake and the other one didn't. So maybe the recoil profile was a little bit different. But for the, again, it's a Bethesda game that the shooting is passable and it still feels good. Is the thing is Fallout. I say that kind of, and that's not to say that the shooting is not bad. It's not. I'm not trying to be reductive about it. Fallout 4 shooting was good. It was an improvement over Fallout 3's and Fallout New Vegas's. They seem to have tightened it up a little bit more. I would say change your sensitivity settings a little bit to make sure that it feels good for you. If you're on mouse and keyboard, if you're on controller, you're a little bit SOL. I hate playing controller these days, but for anything that's a shooter. But the gunplay feels decent. Melee feels good. You go up and hit something with like a utility axe, they crumple and it has a good impact. Enemies seem a little bit spongy, which is again typical of kind of the Bethesda design. Is there's not that much complexity to fighting an enemy outside of the higher level they get, the spongier they get, right? They may do a little bit more damage. They may come with different types of weapon loadouts. I did notice some of the spacers and stuff had kind of a white bar over their names. At first I thought it was a shield, but then I realized it's some sort of it's almost like a stagger system, to where if you do enough damage to kind of zero out that white bar, it took an extra chunk out of their life and also kind of staggered them a little bit. So there's probably some weakness stuff that you can kind of exploit. It shields, if someone has for whatever reason, if there's like personal shields or something, maybe lasers do more damage to those. I'm sure there's other weapons like explosives. I haven't gotten any grenades. I haven't gotten any of the kind of cooler weaponry that they tease inside of any of the gameplay trailers so far. I haven't done any zero-G fighting. I think they did showcase zero-G fighting and kind of showed that, like, hey, this follows Newtonian physics, to where, if you fire a bullet in one direction, you're going to go backwards against the force of the bullet. I don't know yet. It's too soon to tell whether or not that stuff is going to be any fun. Which kind of leads me into my next point is the pacing seems weird. Pacing in Bethesda games has always been kind of odd, where it seems like the kind of intro stuff is a little bit... It's a little lengthy, right? And this is kind of one of the things that I always have a problem with games that have a long startup time and onboard, is if it takes this long to onboard somebody into your game, I understand that there's a lore component to it and there's a story component to it, and you're trying to establish a setting and establish the player to buy into your game and buy into the conceit of what they're trying to do, and like lead them and like basically expound upon them why they should care. But I always have a problem with that, because it means that you kind of can't get a good impression the first 2 hours in. I'm still somewhat, I have at least gotten the sense that this is at least fun to play, but I don't necessarily know if it gets better than this, or is it, is the height of the excitement when the ship touches down, right? Because we're still kind of doing introductory stuff. It's still kind of giving me introductory, menus that show up and say, hey, you do this to do, press E to pull out your gun, or press F to pull out your flashlight. It's still kind of giving me those tutorials. It hasn't really even explained that much about the crafting mechanics, right? It certainly hasn't shown me how to model weapon or anything like that. So there's still bits of the game that we haven't really seen yet, and we streamed roughly 2 hours of it. The stream's been going about 3.5 hours now. We've probably played about just under 2 hours, or just at 2 hours. So if you're worried about that kind of thing, and especially if you are not sure if you want to buy into it, because this is at $70, you may want to watch a couple streams of somebody who plays a little bit longer, or continue to watch our streams to see if you are going to like this game, right? Because again, it's big expense for some people right now for $70. So that kind of covers some of the gameplay. The ship stuff it's passable. It's arcadey. It's definitely, there's some bits of complexity in there, like changing your power between different modules of the ship, like your weapons, your engines, your shields, your gravity on the ship. But it's not too complex. There seems to be, the piloting of it is pretty self-explanatory. It gives you a lot of guides on your HUD on how to, like, hey, you need to hit this zone on the throttle in order to do turns really well. Or, hey, when you press boost, here's the gauge that goes up and down. And it also gives you like a speedometer on how fast you're moving. And the the targeting is pretty generous, right? If you keep the reticle over them long enough, then it establishes a missile lock. Otherwise, you know, you can just click and you'll fire your lasers. You can, like, you know, right click to fire like a ballistic that does a little bit more damage, but it's slower reload. Maybe it gets more complex whenever you are able to fully customize your ship. Again, hard to say, but I would imagine it just becomes like, hey, what kind of ship do you want to pilot? Do you want to pilot a more nimble one? Do you want to strap a whole bunch of guns to this thing and it basically just be a capital ship? Part of it just kind of depends on what they allow you to get away with on the ship customization. I would imagine it's they hyped it up a lot, and the way that the ships are designed and the way that they kind of went for that modular style, that like, you know, quote unquote NASA punk style, that probably lends itself a lot to the customization, which I think is neat. If it ends up pulling through, you know, the fact that they tried to suit the art style to the function of the game, I think that's really cool. Some of the systems have gotten an overhaul. The persuasion system isn't just, you know, you have this amount of persuasion skill, so you just get this dialogue option that auto passes you through. It does seem like there is a little bit more of a mini game to it, where you're kind of actually having a conversation, which is kind of nice. I don't really quite understand how it works. It just seems like some of the options are more likely to succeed than others. The harder ones seem to give you more progress towards persuading that person, whereas the easier kind of softball questions don't, you know, they aren't as hard to convince them. I don't know, maybe there's soft skill checks in the background that it's just not telling you about. It seems okay though. Nothing show-stopping, nothing groundbreaking. The lockpick system is a little bit revamped. They aren't doing the kind of spin this until it jiggles just enough and then you know, turn the lockpick in order to pop the lock off, right? There's a little bit more of a mini game to it. It's just a little bit more complexity to it. It's a little bit more like puzzle solving though, and less just, I'm just gonna wiggle this around until it feels right. Yeah, I know how pervy that probably sounds. I'm sure that'll get clipped out of context. Let's cover story. So story to this game, I mean, it seems kind of interesting. Like there's kind of this weird alien artifact that you have discovered. It seems to interact with you weirdly and a couple of other people weirdly. It could be aliens, it could be not aliens. It's definitely not people. Seems to be it gives you weird visions. You know, if it's a typical Bethesda game, I'm sure the main story will probably be like it'll be somewhere between average and above average. You know, it's been quite a while since Bethesda has had a fantastic main story. I honestly I didn't finish Skyrim because I got bored with the main story. I finished Oblivion because I enjoyed the main story well enough. Morrowind is probably the highlight of, you know, Morrowind was probably the highlight of my main storylines that Bethesda has written. I don't count New Vegas. New Vegas is not really a Bethesda game. It was done by, Obsidian, which is, you know, they're an extremely venerated writing team. So I don't really count New Vegas as belonging to like the Bethesda writing team, but it at least seems intriguing enough. There's some elements of, you know, there seem to be some elements of like exploring the unknown, which is a kind of a different thing for them, and it's definitely going for that frontiersman feeling, that is something I will say is really refreshing, is the fact that the story seems to be gearing more towards being a little bit more optimistic is kind of cool. They haven't really done that in a while. I don't think they've ever done it. Fallout doesn't, mostly because the games that they make previously before Starfield just don't really, the subject matter of being optimistic doesn't really lend itself well to the aesthetic and the world and the lore that they're building. For the most part, the Elder Scrolls games have been a little bit closer to dark fantasy. Not very many good warm feelings you can have in Skyrim, right? Like, it's Skyrim, you're in the middle, you're trying to navigate a civil war, and your place in it is the Dragonborn. In Oblivion, you're trying to navigate what is going on. Why are all these demon gates opening up everywhere? Like, what is it, the end of the world? Is something like, what's going on? In Morrowind, you are a kind of potentially reincarnated god who has to fight essentially a morally ambiguous other god, and you're dealing with all the politics of that. Fallout is a post-apocalyptic, kind of adventure. There is a little bit of lightheartedness to it, but it's closer to like pulpy sci-fi lightheartedness. It's not really, the main storylines for the most part are not very happy. They're very much like, oh, it's rough out here in the Badlands, huh? That's kind of the story. But this one seems to be like, hey, where's your spirit of exploration? Like, don't you want to figure out if this is an alien artifact that exists and is giving you these weird visions? You also seem to be, again, like, the setting seems to be like, hey, you're on the frontier. We just found out that Earth is basically uninhabited and everyone's abandoned Earth. So everyone's out in these kind of colonies that are scattered all throughout the stars, and there's not really, like, the central government kind of barely holds things together. Like, there's strong vibes of Firefly, right? Firefly kind of had very similar things to where, like, hey, this is the frontier, like, people are just trying to survive. But there's also this element of, we want to explore and see more, and like, we want to push the boundaries of our civilization and kind of seek out the stars and be those explorers, right? All of the, and you're the kind of the constellation, the organization that you kind of link up with, they are kind of there to further that, right? They want to be, they're all kind of gung-ho about, like, potentially finding something neat and cool about this alien artifact that you have interacted with. So, I mean, and maybe it pays off. I don't know. It's kind of hard, again, kind of hard to tell. We also haven't really hit any side stories yet, which that is something that Bethesda has done very, very well. Despite how well the main storyline usually goes, is their side stories have usually been excellent. There's usually something compelling about them. There's usually even cooler things to discover in the side stories than there are in the main story. And maybe we'll get to that. I don't know. And I would imagine that a lot of those writers are still there at Bethesda writing those side stories. So maybe some of that story and some of that lore and some of that kind of fleshing out of this world comes out there. All right. So let's cover presentation next. Presentation. So I am floored and astounded to say this might be one of the more smooth launches they've ever had for a Bethesda game. In the 2.5-3 hours that we played, we didn't hit any game-breaking bugs. We didn't really see anybody just T-posing. We didn't see anybody just, like, flying upside down anywhere. I didn't have any crashes. It seems to perform relatively well on my machine. I did bump down the quality settings down to high in an attempt to figure out why my CPU was getting chewed through so much, which I still have to figure that out. That might not be a Starfield problem. That may be something wrong with my machine problem. But for the most part, it felt like it was a kind of a finished product, which I'm sorry to say, but Fallout 4 did not feel like that. It was kind of buggy at launch. There seemed to be a lot of performance issues with it, and overall, I think I remember not really having a good experience with the launch. Now I do remember them patching it later, and it kind of felt better. And of course, mods came out later to later to fix some of the performance problems. But at least for the presentation portion of this, they do seem to have kind of figured out a little bit. And maybe it's the Microsoft resources, maybe it's the Microsoft kind of Microsoft Gaming's kind of push to make sure that they're releasing quality games, which is weird to say because Redfall was a mess, but this at least seems like it received the polish it needed, that it's at least smooth to play, right? In terms of aesthetic, which is nested underneath presentation in my opinion, is I like the aesthetic they're going for. This kind of cool NASA punk thing that they've got going on, I think it's neat. And oddly enough, I was worried about the engine not changing. They said that this is like their most up-to-date version of the Radiant engine or whatever. And I thought, it was like, oh god, this thing's gonna, like, this thing again, like, come on, like, why haven't we figured out a way to use another engine and utilize another engine, and so that way some of this stuff works a little bit better. But weirdly enough, this engine works really, really well with this aesthetic. And I don't know if it's because they just decided to do a lot of work to make sure it was working well, and some of the changes and optimizations they made to the engine allowed them to kind of reach a good graphical fidelity, as well as a pretty, again, like, the aesthetic is nice. Like, it's nice bright colors. The worlds that I've been on so far, they feel organic. They don't feel like they were crafted in a level editor someplace. There were a decent amount of, whenever we landed on New Atlantis, there seemed to be a lot of people congregating around, and I didn't see repeats of faces, and I didn't see anybody bugging out and running into each other or doing weird, again, like, I didn't see any weird, like, T-posing stuff. We saw, like, one lady who was clipping through a wall, but I had to get pretty close up to realize that she was clipping through a wall. So, you know, hats off to Bethesda developers. They made a game that might in fact just work. Maybe I'll eat my words on that. Maybe we'll see a whole bunch of clips come out of stuff just, you know, this world is completely coming apart at the seams, but at least in my experience, seems okay. Like, seems like it does just work. Now, you will have to keep in mind, I do have a more powerful system than probably a normal person, than what is reasonable, so it could be attributed to that. But again, let me talk about the aesthetic of this game. Is the cool NASA stuff. Like, everything looks like it belongs on the ISS, like the International Space Station, not in school suspension. Your ship definitely feels like there is a modular feel to it, to where, like, you can take pieces off, which I'm hoping, you know, I can't wait to dive into some of the customization. I think the outpost building will hopefully feel better than it did in Fallout 4 and feel more fleshed out. I obviously haven't gotten to it yet, but hopefully it feels more organic, because the way that the outpost building was in Fallout 4, it just kind of felt like you're just slapdashing stuff together in a not great way just to hit, like, arbitrary, like, number caps so you can attract more people. In this one, it definitely, because of the way they've chosen to kind of go for this modularized feel to everything, hopefully it kind of snaps together a little bit better. You know, maybe it feels more like Legos than it does, you know, Mega Bloks. I don't know if that might be dating myself if you don't understand what that is. So let's first impression roundup. Game is good. I think if you are a fan of Bethesda games, this is more of the same, but actually more polished than what their normal fare is. They seem to have gotten their launch issues ironed out. You know, the extra time they took hopefully was spent polishing and bug fixing and QAing and using those Microsoft resources in order to kind of make sure that the onboarding is not what's in the way of somebody playing this game. The other stuff though, so again, like, so some of the stuff that I don't like was there's much more of an emphasis on menus. And I saw this complaint in reviews, is that a lot of people said that is very menu heavy, and I'm starting to see what they mean. Is you're going into a menu to fast travel. You're going into a menu when you get to a planet and you need to dock into with something. You're going into a menu to check your journal, to then select, to that then takes you to another menu, which is the star chart, which you select where you need to go, and then you press and hold X in order to go there. It's kind of it. I understand why it's there, because they couldn't, part of the stability might be lent to the fact that it's not a single contiguous world, and you can't just travel from one end of the galaxy to the other in your spaceship, and there's no load times. There's all of those menus and stuff are probably hiding load screens and things that are happening in the background, so that way the game is more stable. But you can definitely feel it. Skyrim tried to do this thing where basically the only load times you needed to hit were whenever you entered a town or entered a dungeon, right? Otherwise, you were able to walk around everywhere, and you could walk from one end of the Skyrim to the other without ever hitting a load screen. You can't really do that here. There's I tried to kind of boost towards the planet so that way I could land, because I couldn't remember whether or not it would auto land you. And I don't even think the world gets any bigger. Like the planet, as you're getting closer, I don't think there's any sense of scale that you get as you get closer and closer to it. I think it just skyboxes there, and you have to go into a menu and select the planet that you want to land on, and then you go through the landing animation and stuff, which again, I wouldn't necessarily mind. I don't mind the landing animation. What I do mind is that it feels less wondrous, and the immersion's a little bit of that wonder and excitement that you get for being an explorer in space is a little bit broken, because you have to navigate through 3 different menus in order to get to where you want to go. I also do not like the fact that does not seem to be a map when you land. I don't understand how that got through. If there is no map, which I really hope there's a map. I just know when I landed in New Atlantis, which maybe you buy a map off somebody, or there's some sort of data terminal or something, or a pickup that gives you a map. But that seems silly, seeing as though this is, if you want to go by the conceit and the lore of the game, this is supposed to be a settled planet. I should have a damn map. And the fact that if I press M, and all it gives me is this kind of weird terrain map with a whole bunch of dots on it and some vague icons of where there might be settlements, but there's no map of the town, at least. That seems like a pretty large misstep for just onboarding a player and making it easy to navigate around in your world. I don't even mean you need a huge map. You can have a little tiny, you can have a very confined map for just the town that you're in. If you want to go with everything else outside the town is undiscovered. How do I know where the shop is? How do I know where I can sell my stuff? Are there going to be waypoints for that? Is there an NPC that I just missed talking to that would direct me to where I can do all of that? I don't know. Which maybe we'll find out tomorrow. We're gonna play more tomorrow. I plan on playing a good chunk more of this during the day, and kind of progressing. What we'll probably do is try to stick with the main storyline and try to get to the end of the main storyline while kind of opportunistically doing side quests along the way of stuff that seems interesting. There's absolutely no way I can 100% this game on stream. It's not gonna happen. But maybe we can get to the end. Maybe we play this through till we hit the end of the main story, and pick up some stuff along the way that seems like it'd be fun to do. But at least my first impression is that it is good. IGN gave this 7 of 10. I think I'm starting to see why. There are glaring flaws with it. There do seem to be problems, but it's still fun. And I'm interested, right? I want to see where this goes. The story seems cool. The presentation is really good. It feels good to play. I want to try to iron out some of the OBS performance problems I have, so that way you guys can get it in 60 FPS. But you know, the game seems good. You know, 7 out of 10, which is I think is perfectly acceptable. Like, I think that is a perfectly fine rating to go for. But anyway, so that kind of, I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of whether or not this is good. But I think the big old asterisk on this is, and this is kind of like, this could basically be on the tagline of this game, is it's a Bethesda game. It is kind of one of the better versions of a Bethesda game. If you like Bethesda games, this is gonna be for you. Right? Nothing else to really say about it. It's a very good one of those. There's some flaws with it, but I'd rather take some weird design decisions over a busted game, if that makes sense. You know, because at least the map not being there, if it's not there, at least that's deliberate. You know, a NPC T-posing and glitching out and like falling through the world and things not being where they're supposed to be and like crappy performance, like those are not usually an intentional problems. Those are usually just a result of like, hey, you know, they couldn't QA it properly, or this game's like they didn't have time to optimize it, stuff like that. Missing a map, you know, there being kind of a lot of menus that you have to jump through in order to play the game, is, you know, those are at least design decisions. Those are at least things that they consciously did and they thought were good ideas, which, sure. I mean, I played plenty of games that, I mean, for God's sake, we started this channel playing Tarkov. Like, Tarkov is rife with weird design decisions and bugs. So, you know, if this one just has some weird design decisions, okay, I'm cool with it.
With my word of color, you never would not fade. Pushed me further to discover a whole new universe again. I know we're young, but we're damn strong.